I feel like that many times that I'm not the Christian person that I should be, and maybe you feel the same way. I can't say that you do, but God has just laid many different topics, many different messages on my heart here lately, and I never know from one Sunday to the next what I'm going to do. But very early in the week, He lays it on me. He'll lay it out. There'll be something that'll happen, something that will come up, some book that I'll read, or something that will get my attention. And I think of myself as a fairly active person. You know, from 5 o'clock in the morning till sometimes 10, 11 o'clock at night, there's things that's going on in my life. I'm not usually getting the time to study like I need to, but there's things that's going on. There's gears are turning up here. You may see some sparks off of them sometimes by I'm trying to get the cart before the horse, and I don't mean to do that, but I aim to, and I want to deliver a message that God would have me to do. We've been talking about the last few Sundays about integrity and grace and apostasy and things like this, but this message of love is probably one that will lift us up, carry us across the waters, or it may condemn us. How will you look at it? By the time this message is over today, how will you be judged? I'm not the judge. I am more wrong lots of times than I am right. Forgive me, I'm only human. If you cut me, I bleed blood. If you throw dust in my face, that messes up my air. There's just all kinds of things, but I can prove to you that I'm just a human being and I don't feel worthy to be standing here. Why that God has chosen me to do this, I am not worthy. I'm not. He could just as easily, if you feel the same way I do, He could just as easily put you in the pulpit. Now, walking in love, Roy had a comment, and he wanted to put it on the board this morning. Living a life ruled by the love of God is what opens you up to walk in the Spirit and live in the highest measure of the blessing and power of God. If you're here this morning, it's probably because somebody had the love of Jesus in their heart. An old, dirty, rotten sinner had the love of Jesus in their heart to invite you here, to bring you into the threshold of God's love so that we could talk about it, we could worship Him, and we could study about Him and what His intentions are for our lives. I think that this is a great time for us to come together as His children under His roof, for us to share with one another His love. There's one thing that can mend better than Elmer's glue, and that's God's love. Amen. You can do all kinds of things on your own, but God's the one who can work the miracles. Walking in love. Now, I had read about some stories about love and commentaries and things like that. And I had a story that just really took my mind right back to where that I wanted you to know about some things that was going on in other people's lives. There's different kinds of love, and the one love that I wanted to talk about first was the lack of love. The lack of love. There was a man and his friend that were playing golf, and one of the guys was getting ready to make a chip shot, whatever that is. I don't know anything about golf, but some of y'all probably are experts at it, or talk like you do. As he prepared to stroke the ball on the green, he saw a long funeral procession on the road next to the golf course. The man took off his golf cap, got on his knees, and bowed his head to pray. His friend said, "Wow, this is the most thoughtful and touching thing I have ever seen. I can't believe how great it was for you to stop your golf swing because of a funeral procession passing by. What thoughtfulness!" The man replied, "Yeah, well, we were married 35 years. I figured that was the least I could do." Now, that was a lack of love. The man was playing golf to kneel down and pray for a woman who'd been married for 35 years. It's just a little late, wouldn't you say? That's what a lot of us do. We give a nod to God and we continue on with business as usual. First, love is more than functional love. It's fiery love. It's, God there is proof that there is a God in each and every one of us. Because if you're here this morning, it's because of love. If there's hatred and sorrow and all kind of stuff in your life and you're bullheaded and you don't care if you're around nobody, then you may be an atheist. But because of love, you're here, right? That's the way I see it. Now, I've got maybe 3 topics I'm going to talk about this morning. The first one is to pray for greater love. Do any of y'all ever do that? I have. I've prayed for greater love. It's like learning about patience. You pray for patience, guess what you get? You get trouble and trials because it teaches you to be more patient. Now, if you pray for greater love, the opportunity is going to come up. Are you going to practice what you pray for, or are you just going to let it slide by? Are you loving people enough to tell them about Jesus? I think that we need to pray for greater love to really put us to the test to see how great our love is. I have several people that come to me this past week and had problems. Their concerns are so great. That tells me that there's something there. There's something going on inside that beating heart other than blood. It's the love of Jesus. If you're a Christian, there has to be the love of Jesus in your heart. You don't, maybe you don't like everything that everybody does, but you love them, right? I had a guy in our community, and boy, he was mean. He was just mean. And the way that I had to learn it, I talked to different pastors and things about what was going on, and he said, well, he says one thing about it, you don't have to like what the man's doing, but to share your Christian faith, you have to love him. Isn't that what Jesus did for us? He loved us. He didn't like the things that we were doing. He didn't like the sinful lives we were living. He didn't like the things that's going on in our lives, but he still loved us, and by his love for me, it helped me to be able to share that love with others, even though I didn't like what they were doing. Now, one of the most productive things we can do to pursue a life beyond amazing is to read Paul's prayers for the churches he was involved with. He didn't pray for greatest attendance, bigger offerings, or even more people becoming Christians. When we examine his prayers, we discover something far more challenging. The first example is that Paul wrote a letter to Philippi, the church at Philippi, and he said this, "And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment." That's in Philippians 1:9. The challenging thing in our life is today is that when we become Christians, we think that we're automatically going to be changed in a moment, in a twinkling eye. And some people have that life change automatically, but we all have to learn love. We all have to learn. If you'll watch children in school, when they start kindergarten and first grade and all that stuff, some of those kids, boy, I mean, they're really catching it. They're really going forward. Then there's some that's maybe a little slower. I think that I was in the slower part. And I feel like that in being a Christian that I was really slow. I wasn't as gifted as some people was. I wish that I was, because there's been a lot of time to make up for, and you can't make up time here on earth. You can just only stop and go forward in your life. But another example was this. It's found in Ephesians, when Philip wrote a letter to the Ephesian church, Ephesians 3:16 through 19. And for the believers in Ephesus, this was his prayer. He said that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might through his Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width, the length, and the depth, and the height, to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge, that you may be filled with all fullness of God. I'm amazed day after day how much I have truly missed, because I haven't grasped that greater love, that height, that depth, that width of the love of God. And I probably never will on this earth. And it may take me all eternity, which is forever and ever, because God is so great and so awesome and so wonderful. All the things that He's doing, the knowledge, this is way beyond me. I don't know if you feel this way or not, but it's way beyond me. It's this awesomeness of God. I don't think awesomeness or awesome is a great enough word, but I don't know any other word to describe our God. Do you? If you do, see me after church. I want to know. I'm going to put that in my vocabulary. I want to know what that word is. And there's another example that he wrote about in 1 Corinthians 11:1, if you want to look that one up. But Paul urged his readers to imitate him. We too should pray for greater love, whether we're praying that prayer for others or for ourselves. It is God's desire for all of us that we continue to grow in our ability to love one another. I promise you, this is a prayer we will surely answer. If you think about the book of Hosea, if you've ever read the book of Hosea, if you hadn't read it, about Hosea's love for Gomer. Now, I think that I probably didn't or don't have that greater love like Hosea does. I would have booted her to the sidewalk. That's what, flesh and blood will do to you. But Hosea loved Gomer so much. She was a prostitute. And he loved that woman so much. Each time she would go out, he would go get her and bring her back and loved her just like she hadn't done anything. That's a very, very hard thing to do. For us to wipe the slate clean and say, come on home, I love you. Hosea did this. This book is an example of God's love for us. As we are sinners, we are of sinful nature, we do just as bad a thing as Gomer did of leaving Hosea. We treat God like that. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. The most perfect person on this earth does the same thing. I've heard such great preachers as Billy Graham, Charles Stanley, and a bunch of these guys preach, and their sentiments, their thoughts are the same way. They consider themselves sinners. I've not heard any bad things on some of these guys, but they say that they feel like I do. I mean, I feel like I'm a dirty, low-down, rotten hypocrite. I mean, if you get out, especially on the farm, and you get around equipment and trucks and things like that, you're going to get dirty. We're out here. We could walk from here to Atwood in a big old shiny white suit, and I guarantee you, before you got to Atwood, somebody's going to throw some dirt on you. You're going to get dirty. You're not going to. You can't help it. You know, it's just the life that we live in. The only place that you're not going to get dirty is in heaven. When you wear that robe of white, it's going to be a great time. That's what I say. But we need to pray for that greater love. There was another story talking to you about the power of love, and this story I just told you about Hosea and Gomer. It was about a husband and a wife. Now, I don't know why God showed me this, but I see it now. But it was about a husband and a wife. One day they were fussing. They were really going at it. Nobody had to call the law, but they just decided, and the wife did. She suggested that they write down their complaints on one another on a piece of paper, and then show the other person exactly how they felt. Any of y'all ever done that? Well, don't be embarrassed to raise your hand if you have. We hadn't got into that yet. But she thought it might cut down on the bickering. And the husband agreed and got the paper. He went and got the paper. He said, let's do it. She got out the pencils, and they both started writing. And they both were wrote furiously for a while, and the husband would pause and look at his wife and write some more. And the wife would pause and look up at her husband and write some more. And the husband paused again and looked at his wife and with an even angrier look on his face, and then he would write some more. And the wife did the same and then put her pencil down, and her husband was still writing. He looked up at her in fury and continued writing, and he kept writing. Then he wrote some more, and then he wrote even more. And the wife was getting furious because she had covered one side of the page, and her husband was finishing the back side of his paper. He kept looking up at her and coming up with more to write. And every time he looked up, something new would come, and he'd write some more. The wife was in pain and agony, and she was clenching her fist, and tears of anger were welling up in her eyes. And finally, her husband said that he was finished. They exchanged sheets of paper and looked at each other's sheet. As soon as she gave him her sheet, she looked at his, and she felt terrible. She wanted to take her sheet back. For when she looked at her husband's sheet of paper, in spite of his anger and in spite of his pain, and he had written on every line, I love you. I love you. I love you. I'm ticked off, but I love you. I'm angry, but I love you. I don't want to be here right now, but I love you. And when she saw that much love, it covered the multitude of sins that had brought up the argument in the first place. That's a pretty humble, great love, isn't it? When you and I love one another like that, that kind of love can cover up a multitude of sins. It's a hard thing for us to forgive one another many times. I know some people right now family members that are going at it, and they won't forgive. They won't forgive. I got in the middle of a family situation one time, and one of the persons died, and the other one wouldn't come to the funeral. It's sad. I got caught up in the middle of that. I don't know how I keep getting caught in these situations, but I'm not the peacemaker, guys. Jesus is. Jesus is the peacemaker. Another one of the topics for us to think about is to love our enemies. Difficult, unpleasant people are one thing. You ever run into somebody like that? A difficult person. An enemy is something very different. It may be one of the most difficult things we are called to do in this life, but Jesus very clearly commands us to love our enemies. In Matthew 5:43-45, it says, it may be one of the most difficult things that we ever do, but this verse says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. In the Old Testament, now that's what they were teaching, especially even in Jesus' day, the old Pharisees. They would see a Samaritan, and they would rather walk 150 miles around Samaria to keep from having to deal with those people. They were considered dogs. It's what they considered them. Matthew said, but I say to you, what Jesus said, but I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. What would Jesus do? A few years ago, that WWJD came out. It's what would Jesus do? If you get into a situation, Christian people, what we should do is think for a moment before we decide what we're going to say or do. What would Jesus do in a situation like this? What would Jesus do? Some examples of loving your enemies are found in the Bible, Luke 23:34, where Jesus gave the ultimate example of giving his life on the cross. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then in Acts 7:60, Stephen was being stoned to death for preaching the gospel, and he also asked God to forgive his executioners. It says, then he knelt down and cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not charge them with this sin. And then the Apostle Paul spent his adult life as a servant of the gospel and was beaten, whipped, rebuked, and despised for it. In 1 Corinthians 4:12-13, Paul said, being reviled, we bless. Being persecuted, we endure. Being defamed, we entreat. And in his letter to the Romans, Paul said, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Another story that I found during the American Revolution, a pastor named Peter Miller was opposed and humiliated by Michael Whitman, an evil-minded man who did all he could to suppress the gospel. One day, Mr. Whitman was arrested for treason and sentenced to die. Rather than breathe a sigh of relief at the news, Peter Miller traveled 70 miles on foot to plead for his enemy's life. When General George Washington first listened to the plea, he told Miller that he would not grant the life of his friend. At that, the pastor leaped to his feet and said, "My friend," he exclaimed, "Michael Whitman is not my friend. He is but my bitterest enemy." Washington changed his mind and granted a pardon. Peter Miller was doing exactly what Jesus called us to do. He was loving his enemy, not in how he felt toward the man, but in what he did for the man. Have you ever thought about that? Maybe that person that might have a problem with you, what if you were in that person's shoes? And that the love that you have for that person by praying for them to love you back. You know, they have done studies over in Russia and places like this that they took these abandoned children and they took half of them and put them in one side of this place where they kept these children, and they didn't show them love. All they did was took care of their needs. But the other side, they showed them love, of passion, and expression of love, and hugged them and everything. And the ones that were loved did so much better than the others. It proved the point that we can't live without love. We can't live without love. Some of us have habits. Some of us have things in our lives that others can't overlook. But I pray if you've got something that is about me, pray for me. I need your prayers. I need forgiveness when I fall short. I need to know that I am loved, don't you? When we are away from our families at a very long time, we need to know that family loves us. When we are persecuted and burdened, you know, the thing that got Paul through the ministry while he was here on earth is the love of Jesus Christ. He preached Jesus. He preached about the love of Jesus, and he experienced that love because, you see, Paul had been one of those that had beaten Christians. He had them arrested. He may have even had them killed. He stood and helped the coats of the ones that stoned Stephen. Paul knew what hatred was about. Paul knew that. But since that light, that great light which Jesus shone on him on the road to Damascus, and Paul got saved there, changed his life forever. We shouldn't be afraid to risk. That's the third point that I want to make. Don't be afraid to risk it. Don't be afraid to risk the love. Maybe there's a next door neighbor that you need to make the first step to go and love that person. Maybe there's someone else. Maybe there's that enemy that you just need to throw up a white flag and say, "Hey, Jesus loves you. And I do too." We shouldn't be afraid to risk it. One reason people give for withholding love from others is that they don't want to get hurt. How many of y'all heard that? How many of y'all have used that excuse? I'll be honest with you. I don't want to be hurt. So I just ignore the situation. How many, if you've been asked to go on a mission trip or something, well, I just don't like them people. I'm just not going to go. I can never go. They talk about the times when they loved and were wounded in return. I'll never trust anyone again. They say, I'll never let anyone hurt me like that again. If you've experienced rejection or have walked through it with others, I understand your determination never to risk that happening again. But listen to this before you make that decision. Listen to this. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Loving anything and your heart will certainly be wrong and possibly broken. I loaded a car one time. And I totaled it out. Now, Jimmy was riding with me, and a fella down the road said, boy, the Lord was sure with y'all. Y'all got through this, and y'all got you lived. And yeah, and Jimmy said, yeah, and man, the Lord's fixing to ride with somebody else from now on. But if you love things, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose them. The only thing that you can love is someone else that you can help carry it to heaven. Amen. That's the only thing. You're not going to carry your house. You're not going to carry your car. You're not going to carry your puppy dog. You're not going to carry other things. But you can influence other people with love and carry them to heaven. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal, because you could lose them, right? Doris loves animals. We got a black wildcat out there, and she loved that animal. It's tame now. It will even come in the house. I don't think it likes me too much because all I got to do is kick at it and then it'll run. But that woman's got great love. She loves animals. You know, she loves children. She loves people, and that's great. I've learned a lot from that woman. After 41 years, going on 42, I've learned a lot. I need to learn a lot more. I don't deny that. But we need to wrap it carefully round with hobbies and with luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in a casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers of love is hell. Have you ever thought about that? If you want to lock the world out, if you just want to be that type of person, the only place that you can escape love is hell, because there will be no love in hell. There'll be a lot of those that wish they had practiced more love. An example of this, and be a great example for all of us, is to share this kind of love. It's in 2009, Lisa Finn was an ESPN features television producer looking for a good story. She found it when she met and filmed two young wrestlers at Cleveland's Lincoln West High School. 7 years later, she wrote about what became a life-changing experience. Don't be afraid to love. This woman wasn't. D'Artagnan Crockett was a high school's top wrestling talent, a winner of multiple weight classes. D'Artagnan was also homeless and legally blind. When Lisa met him, he subsisted, or he lived on soggy mozzarella sticks and bruised apples served in a cafeteria. Perched on his back was a young man named Leroy Sutton. Leroy traveled around up there because he had no legs, and the school had no elevator. When he was 11, he was hit by a freight train. Paramedics saved his life, but his left leg was amputated below the knee and his right leg below the hip. Lisa filmed the two boys and their world for 5 months later, editing their story carry on. She prayed that just one viewer would be moved to help the boys in a meaningful way. Her prayer was answered. Viewers around the world took the boys into their hearts, and emails filled her inbox offering help. And that's when love took over. Lisa personally responded to nearly 1,000 emails. She managed donations, speaking invitations, financial aid forms, and college visits, all while ensuring that D'Artagnan and Leroy were finally fed on a daily basis. The attention brought D'Artagnan a different kind of training. In March of 2010, coaches invited him to live at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs and learn the Paralympic sport of judo. There he would have shelter, sport, mentors, school, medical care, and as he proudly showed Lisa on a visit to Colorado, his first bed. Against the odds, D'Artagnan earned a spot on the 2012 Paralympic team going to London Olympics, and there he won the bronze. When the medal was draped around D'Artagnan's neck, Leroy and Lisa were there to see it. Then he said, "Things like this don't happen to kids like us." He cried on that unimaginable night, his face beaming bronze, his tears soaking Lisa's shoulder. And he is right, Lisa wrote. Blind and legless kids from the ghettos don't get college educations and shiny accolades, but they should. And that is why I stayed, because hope and love and rejoicing and redemption can happen to kids like them. During a visit to the eye doctor in 2009, D'Artagnan included Lisa on the consent form so she could access his records if need be. Later that day, she got a call from the office administrator. "I just thought you should know that D'Artagnan wrote on his consent form today," she said. "Next to your name on the release is a space that says relationship to patient. D'Artagnan wrote, guardian angel." I thought that was a long story, but I thought it was worth reading to you this morning. That there, I believe, are angels that are watching over us. I believe that there are people that do care about me, that care about you. There are people that want to see other people do better. And there is a God that loves us. He loved you and me so much that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. We've got to know that we're loved. Just like that wildcat that Doris tamed. That cat had to know that somebody loved her. Somebody human loved her. She was tired of catching mice. That's what I hate about it. That cat was a good mouser. But now it lives on scrambled eggs and milk. You know, hey guys, in heaven we're going to be fed so good by a loving God. There's no telling what that meal will be. Jesus said before He left this earth, as He did the Last Supper with His disciples, "This do in remembrance of me." Because He said, "I will dine again with you someday in heaven." We've got to know that. That's such a greater love. That's such a greater love that I don't really fully understand just yet, but I'm willing to try, and that's called faith. We must practice our faith in growing stronger and loving one another. We must practice our faith, because if we don't, you just will to lock it all up in a casket. Don't be afraid to experience that love. You might say, "Brother Billy, how do I experience that? How do I find that love?" You must trust Jesus. You must trust Him. You must realize that you are a sinner. You must realize that we need to be sorry for those sins. We must realize that from day to day that we are not perfect people yet. Only when we leave this body and we gain that heavenly body, a spiritual body. Now, people, we must realize that we must be soul winners for people that we don't even know, for people that we think that we can't love, but we must love. We must tell them about Jesus. I'm going to give you the invitation this morning while Brother James is coming, is that you would do this. If you need to experience that love, you need to come and say, Brother Billy, I need Jesus, but I don't know what I'm doing. Could you tell me about that? I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to tell you about that. You know, it's easy to go to people that we know that we feel like will accept us and tell them about Jesus. But what about those that we don't know? Maybe they're just waiting. There's no telling how many times I've heard testimonies of people, especially when we were in the Gideons, we were handing out those little personal witness testaments to people. And people would say, oh, I've just been wanting one of these for a long time. What can you tell me what it's all about? What is the Bible about? I don't even have a Bible. This is the first Bible I've ever gotten, and testimonies like this. And we'd tell them about Jesus, and they would accept Him as Lord and Savior. And then we would tell them that the next step is that you need to get in church. You need to be a part of a church that is a soul-winning church, that is a part of a church that loves people. You need to be part of a church that will love you no matter what. We've got a messed up world. And if we ran off everybody that came in these doors that were imperfect people, what would this be? It would be nobody here, right? You could run this preacher off first. I'm not perfect, but I know Jesus. I'm not perfect, but it's like I told my pastor when I walked forward that Sunday morning when I was saved. I love Jesus. And when you come forward and you say something like this, you may not remember a word that is said, but that faith can make you whole. It's taking that first step wherever you need to go. It's that first step like that in life. It's trusting. When we trust so many different things in our lives, we may get hurt. But without the willingness to trust and to love, what's the use? It starts with faith. I want to ask you to stand this morning, whatever that need is.